Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into a single, very well-known verse of the Quran. We're going to put it under a linguistic microscope using one specific rule, letting the Quran define its own terms. And as you're about to see, this word-by-word investigation can completely flip the meaning of the verse on its head. So let's get right into it. All right, so this is Quran 2:187, as you've probably heard it translated. The common understanding is that this verse is all about regulating sexual relations during the nights of Ramadan. It's about permissions, physical acts, and rules. This is, for all intents and purposes, the official story. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But what if that clarity is just an illusion? What if this entire interpretation, the one that seems so obvious, is actually built on a house of cards? A series of critical mistranslations. That's the mystery we're going to unravel today. Now, every good investigation starts with a clue, a piece that doesn't quite fit the puzzle. Our first clue is a single word, Kataba. In that common translation we just saw, it's rendered as ordained or permitted, and it's being used in a very specific physical way. But does it actually mean that anywhere else? So check this out. On this slide, we've laid out every other time the word Kataba shows up in the Quran. And a really clear pattern just jumps right out at you. It consistently means something like a destined outcome, a core principle, or a moral path that's been set. The conclusion is pretty stark. It is never used to talk about bodily functions or sexual rules. So that begs a massive question, right? Why would a word with such a consistent, high-level ethical meaning suddenly do a complete 180 and refer to bedroom permissions in this one single verse? Linguistically, that's a huge red flag. It kind of suggests the interpretation was forced onto the word instead of flowing out of it.
Okay, so a weird word is a great first clue, but one clue doesn't solve the case. To really build our argument, we need more evidence. So let's zoom out and look at the verses that come right before our verse of interest. You know what they say? Context is everything.
So the verses leading up to 187, they set a very clear stage. The entire point of the passage is about achieving taqwa, which is this idea of moral consciousness. The focus is all on ethics, on social good, and on the principle that God wants things to be easier for us, not harder. And you know what's completely 100% missing? Any mention of bodily mechanics or sexual regulations. And this is where the problem becomes really obvious. Imagine you're reading a deep philosophical text about the meaning of life, and then, bam, the next sentence is a recipe for making toast. It's a complete category error. Given the high-level ethical conversation happening, a sudden jump to bedroom law just feels jarring and totally out of place. Okay, quick recap. We have a word that doesn't fit and a context that doesn't fit. So now it's time to zoom back in. We're going to put the other keywords in this verse under our linguistic microscope. And trust me, this is where the case gets really, really interesting. First up, the word rafath. It's almost always translated as sexual intercourse. But if you look at how the Quran itself uses its word in other places, for example in chapter 2, verse 197, it's clearly about crude or unguarded speech. It's about what you say, not a physical act. Then we've got libas. Now this one is often interpreted as a beautiful metaphor for sexual closeness. But here's the thing. The Quran actually gives us a definition. In chapter 7, it says the best libas is the libas of taqwa, the covering of moral consciousness. So the Quran defines it as a moral and ethical protection, not a physical one. How about the phrase betraying yourselves? The common take is that it means, secretly having sex. But the root word for betrayal here, hol, wa, nun, is used consistently throughout the Quran to mean a breach of trust or a broken commitment. It's an internal thing, about undermining your own integrity. It's about conscience, not copulation. And now, for the big one, the supposed command itself, bashiruhunna. This is the phrase translated as, have sexual intercourse with them. The entire sexual interpretation of this verse really hinges on this one verb, which comes from the root word bashar. But get this is the smoking gun. In chapter 19, Mary, vows that she will not speak to any bashar. Here, bashar unambiguously means a human being, someone you talk to. It's about social, communicative interaction. There is zero, zilch, sexual connotation. This one verse is a game changer. It totally undermines the standard translation. So what does bashara really mean then? Well, if we let the Quran define its own terms, it has nothing to do with a physical act. It means to engage with someone openly, directly, consciously. It's about being present with another person, a state of real human connection.
All right, we've taken the engine apart, piece by piece. We've examined all the components. Now it's time to put it all back together using these new Quran-based definitions and see what kind of picture we get.
And look at this, step by step, a completely different narrative emerges. It starts by describing a state of loosened conduct toward your partners. It then says they are a mutual covering, an ethical protection for each other. It acknowledges that you were betraying your own integrity, and God helped reorient you. So the instruction becomes, now, engage with them openly and consciously, and seek the ethical path God has inscribed for you. And hey, there's our first clue, Kataba, fitting in perfectly now. And here's the final result. When you read it this way, the verse is no longer a piece of sexual legislation. It's this profound piece of ethical advice about how to maintain integrity and open communication in your relationships, even when you're in a state of intense self-discipline. It's all about moral coherence, not bodily permission slips. So, we've gone through all that linguistic detective work. What's the big takeaway here? Why does this shift in meaning actually matter? Well, here's the bottom line. The sexual reading of the verse doesn't seem to be a simple mistranslation of just one or two words. It's bigger than that. It's the result of redefining a whole cluster of words, rafath, libas, bashra, kataba, and basically injecting a pre-existing narrative about ritual law into a passage that was, from the very start, about our moral and ethical consciousness. And that brings us to our final, parting thought. Everything we looked at today, it only covers the first half of verse 218. So you have to wonder, if you were to apply the same rigorous Quran internal method to the second half of the verse, which talks about eating and drinking in places of worship, what other long-held interpretations might completely change?